I want you to take a second and just think about the most ubiquitous, like inescapable thing in your profession.
Right, the absolute baseline stuff.
Exactly. Or maybe in your favorite hobby, you know. I am talking about something so incredibly fundamental that literally every single novice starts with it.
Every vendor supplies it.
Yeah, it forms the absolute foundation of your field. Got it in your head?
I have mine, yeah.
Good. Now, imagine that despite having years of high-level, highly specialized experience,
Yeah.
despite mastering like the most complex aspects of this field,
Mm-hmm.
you have completely, intentionally ignored that one common thing.
You just never touch it.
Never. In fact, you actively go out of your way to avoid it, which, you know, on the surface, that sounds entirely counterintuitive.
Oh, totally.
Like, why would someone who knows everything about a subject run away from its most basic building block?
That's a great question.
Right. Well, welcome to the deep dive, because that exact mystery is what we are unpacking for you today.
I am really looking forward to this one.
Me too. Our mission today is to analyze a really short but deeply revealing journal entry. It's titled Notes on Fishkeeping, Part 241, Rethinking the Tetra,
Yeah, published on April 26, 2026.
by an accomplished aquarist and breeder who writes under the name Ang.
And, it is just a fascinating piece of writing to deconstruct.
It really is.
Not just for what it says about aquatic husbandry, but for what it reveals about the architecture of the human mind.
Yeah, the psychology of it.
Exactly. What we have here is a pristine, isolated case study of cognitive bias in real time.
Oh, I love that phrasing.
Well, it's true. We get to look at the exact moment a highly experienced practitioner is basically forced to reevaluate a deeply entrenched assumption.
Which is not easy to do.
No, it highlights a really uncomfortable truth, honestly, that acquiring years of experience doesn't automatically grant you an open mind.
Right.
Often, that experience simply builds much thicker, more resilient walls around your existing prejudices. And it takes a highly specific, undeniable catalyst to finally breach those walls.
That tension right there between profound expertise and outright avoidance, that is exactly where we need to start.
Let's do it.
So the subject of this journal entry is the Tetra.
A classic.
As anyone listening who follows this space already knows, the Tetra is the undisputed backbone of the commercial aquarium hobby.
Oh, without a doubt.
If you walk into any shop, literally anywhere in the world, you're going to see tanks full of them.
Yeah, everywhere.
And Ang, our author, readily acknowledges this, writing that Tetras are a staple in almost every aquarium store. But then we get this confession.
You blind spot.
Right. Despite having many moons of fishkeeping and breeding experience, Ang admits it never once crossed their mind to actually explore keeping them.
Never.
The root cause of this massive blind spot, a reputation. Specifically, the Tetra's reputation for being, in Ang's words, quite fragile.
Quite fragile, yeah.
Okay, let's unpack this, because I am honestly struggling with the logic here. Well, I think about, like, a seasoned, world-class chef. Imagine a chef who has mastered these complex, multi-course tasting menus, but flat out refuses to cook a standard breakfast omelet, because they read that the pan temperature can be finicky.
Right. It sounds ridiculous when you frame it like that.
Wait, but shouldn't true expertise mean you know exactly how to manage that finicky temperature?
You would think so, yeah.
If Ang is a master breeder, why not view a fragile fish as just like a mechanical puzzle to solve, rather than something to run away from?
That's a fair point.
I just feel like the expertise is actually being used as an excuse here to avoid basic troubleshooting.
See, that is a really sharp pushback, and the chef analogy perfectly illustrates the paradox. But if we connect this to the bigger picture, we can start to see how a negative reputation like fragility functions differently for a master than it does for a novice.
Okay, I'm listening.
You are right to ask why an expert wouldn't just solve the puzzle. But you have to look at the mechanics of what the word staple actually means in a global commercial supply chain.
Right, it means volume.
Yes.
It means millions of these fish are moving through the system constantly.
Precisely. And let's break down the biological reality of that massive volume. A mass-produced fish is bred by the tens of thousands in these massive vats.
Okay.
It is then netted, bagged in a tiny amount of water, and shipped via air freight across the globe.
Wow, just the shipping alone.
It's brutal. They are exposed to massive temperature fluctuations and then dumped into a constantly fluctuating temporary holding tank at a local shop.
Right, which sounds incredibly stressful.
It is. The biological stress of that journey fundamentally alters the animal. It spikes their stress hormones, completely suppressing their immune system.
Oh, wow.
So when Ang hears quite fragile, they aren't just hearing a rumor about the species genetics.
Ah, I see.
They are visualizing the compounding biological trauma those specific fish have endured before they even reach the shopping bag.
Okay, so it's not that the tetra as a species is inherently flawed.
No, not at all.
It's that the supply chain basically renders the individual fish arriving at the store physically compromised.
Exactly. And that brings us to the psychology of the expert ego.
The ego, right.
Aang prides themselves on breeding, which requires absolute precision, immense patience, and creating pristine environments.
Like a clean room almost.
Yeah. So for an expert breeder, bringing a compromised, immunosuppressed fish into a meticulously controlled fish room isn't just a financial risk.
It's a threat to their entire system.
It's a massive professional vulnerability. The expert mind runs a subconscious risk-to-reward calculation.
Like, is this worth it?
Exactly. Why risk the biological safety of my existing high-level breeding projects just to attempt to salvage a damaged staple fish that every beginner is already buying?
Right.
The reputation of fragility becomes a highly logical protective shield. The expertise literally builds the blind spot.
You know, that completely flips my perspective on it.
That makes sense, right?
It really does. Because a beginner doesn't know enough about biological trauma or supply chain logistics to be
Wow.
afraid of the fragile label.
Exactly. They just buy the fish and hope for the best.
But the expert knows exactly how devastating a fragile, compromised animal can be to an established ecosystem. So they maintain this strict distance.
They logic themselves into a corner.
They logic themselves right into a corner. And that brings us to the exact moment that logical corner gets blown wide open.
The catalyst.
Yes. Aang leaves the safety of their own controlled fish room and takes a trip out to a few local fish stores.
Just wandering around.
Right, just wandering the aisles, surrounded by all the standard stock. And Aang stumbles upon a group of Balloon Red Eye Tetras.
A very common staple.
And the word Aang chooses to describe them in the journal is mesmerizing.
Mesmerizing.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Because the behavioral description Aang provides totally shatters that supply chain trauma model we just discussed.
Completely shatters it.
Aang specifically notes that these fish were suspended in the water, each guarding its own little territory.
Yeah.
It was such a striking, undeniable display that this veteran breeder literally stopped in their tracks, pulled out a camera, and started taking photos and videos.
Which is a big deal for an expert.
It is. I am looking at this imagery and marveling at the contrast. You have a fish whose entire existence in Aang's mind is categorized by weakness and vulnerability.
Right, the fragile label.
Yet, the physical reality right in front of them is an animal aggressively and confidently holding a perimeter in the middle of the water column.
Reality contradicted the theory.
Completely.
Yeah.
So I have to ask you, what is the biological significance of this? Like, what is it about seeing this specific territorial behavior firsthand that possesses the power to instantly override years of ingrained avoidance?
Well, what's fascinating here is the collision between assumed data and empirical reality.
Okay, go unpack that.
Let's break down the biology of what Aang actually witnessed, because it is crucial to understanding this paradigm shift.
Yeah, the hovering behavior.
Right. Fragility in an aquatic environment has a very distinct physical presentation. A fragile, stressed, or sick fish will clamp its fins to its body to conserve heat.
Like it's shivering.
Kind of, yeah. It will either sink to the bottom substrate or gasp at the surface because it simply lacks the energy to maintain neutral buoyancy.
It's just trying to survive.
Exactly. It hides. It seeks the path of least biological resistance.
So it looks exactly like something that has been traumatized by a global shipping process.
Exactly. But what Aang observed, fish perfectly suspended in the water column and guarding territory, is the behavioral antithesis of fragility.
Wow.
Let's talk about the mechanics of hovering. To stay perfectly suspended, a fish must make constant, minute adjustments to its swim bladder and its pectoral fins.
That sounds exhausting.
It requires acute neurological control and immense caloric expenditure. Furthermore, actively guarding a territory, warding off rivals, asserting dominance over a 3D space requires optimal health and vitality.
So you can't be fragile and do that.
A sick or fragile animal physically cannot afford the caloric energy to act as a tiny underwater sentinel. It is biologically impossible.
So the visual data Aang is taking in is basically screaming, these animals are incredibly robust and powerful.
Right.
While the mental label in their head is screaming, these are fragile and weak.
Yes.
That is massive cognitive dissonance.
It is the ultimate cognitive dissonance. The empirical observation proved that the long-held assumption was fundamentally flawed.
It just broke the model.
And look at Aang's physical reaction to that dissonance. Pulling out the camera to capture photos and videos wasn't just a matter of saying, oh, what a pretty fish, let me post this on social media.
Oh, it was deeper than that.
That act of pausing and recording was an expert documenting their own paradigm shift in real time.
You know, that makes so much sense. You don't stop your day to film something that simply confirms your baseline expectation.
Right, you just keep walking.
You stop to document the anomaly, you film the glitch in your matrix, you know.
It's a great way to put it.
The camera acts as a tool of acknowledgement. It's Aang physically capturing the evidence needed to process the fact that they were wrong.
Precisely. It is the scientific method in action. The hypothesis was tetras are fragile. The observation yielded contradictory evidence. The camera recorded the new data.
Okay, so the mental block has been destroyed. The inspiration is fully ignited.
The fire is lit.
The undeniable video evidence is sitting right there on the phone. This is the moment in the story where you, as a reader, expect the floodgates to open.
Naturally.
You expect the protagonist to run to the counter, buy the entire tank of Balloon Red Eye Tetras, and rush home to start an obsessive new breeding project.
Just go all in.
Right. But that doesn't happen.
No, it doesn't.
Aang reflects on this moment and acknowledges that, over time, they've grown more comfortable with fish keeping. They note they have gained more experience and feel a genuine sense of readiness.
They've matured as a keeper.
And Aang even explicitly mentions having a brand new outdoor fish rack ready to go.
The infrastructure is there.
The physical infrastructure is literally sitting there waiting to be used. Aang writes, honestly, it feels like the right time to revisit them.
The stage is set.
Exactly. So what does this all mean? Because as a reader following this journey, I am totally invested. The setup is perfect. But then Aang drops this massive anticlimax at the very end of the journal entry.
Right at the end.
Aang writes that while they might revisit them, they actually have a few other fish species on their wish list before they will commit to tetras.
Yeah.
They said they'll save that discussion for another post, and that's the end. Honestly, reading that part felt like a massive letdown.
I can see why you'd feel that way.
Like, Aang experiences this major revelation in the Isle, builds the physical rack, proves their own bias wrong, and then basically says, cool, I'll put it on a wait list. Why hit the brakes so hard when you have all that forward momentum?
It certainly feels like an anticlimax when you are reading it as a narrative, but this raises an important question about how professionals actually manage inspiration.
Okay, how so?
I would argue that hitting the brakes, as you call it, is not a letdown at all. It is the clearest proof we have of Aang's maturity as an expert.
Right.
Yes. It separates the amateur enthusiast from the disciplined practitioner.
I'm going to need you to walk me through the mechanics of that, because putting an exciting new discovery on a wait list feels totally counterintuitive to the idea of a breakthrough.
Think about what executing a new project actually requires at an expert level. Overcoming the psychological fear of fragility was only the first step.
Right, that was just the mental part.
Aang notes two crucial developments: internal growth and external preparation. Internally, Aang recognizes that becoming more comfortable and gaining experience took many moons.
It took a long time.
The mental bandwidth to properly research, quarantine, and condition a new species doesn't happen overnight.
True.
Externally, we have to look at the specific infrastructure Aang mentions, the new outdoor fish rack.
Why does the fact that it's an outdoor rack matter so much in this context?
Because an outdoor rack represents an entirely different level of biological complexity compared to a controlled indoor tank.
How is it different?
An outdoor system relies on natural sunlight, which triggers specific breeding cycles. It cultivates natural algae and microfauna, which provide vital live food for fry.
Oh, wow. So it's a whole ecosystem.
Exactly. But it also means dealing with natural temperature fluctuations and weather variables. Taking a species that you previously viewed as deeply fragile and confidently planning to place it in a dynamic outdoor environment shows supreme confidence.
I didn't think about it like that.
The infrastructure is highly specific and purposeful.
Okay, I see the technical weight of the outdoor rack. But why the wish list? Like, why not put the tetras in that perfectly designed rack right now?
Because a true expert knows how to sequence their resources.
Sequence them. Okay.
Think of it like a professional musician who just bought an incredibly complex, vintage analog synthesizer.
Well, I like this.
A novice might rip it out of the box and try to use it on stage that exact same night and inevitably mess up the performance because they don't know the patch bay.
Right, they just want to play with a new toy.
Exactly. A professional musician takes that synthesizer, sets it up in their studio, completely clears their schedule, reads the technical manual, and waits until they have the dedicated time to master it before ever integrating it into their work.
Wow.
That is what Aang's wish list represents.
That is a phenomenal analogy. The wish list isn't a rejection of the Tetra at all.
No.
It's a structured queue of resources.
Exactly. An amateur sees a mesmerizing fish, impulse buys it on the spot, riding a wave of dopamine, brings it home without a dedicated plan, and then inevitably fails.
Which would just reinforce that old bias?
Ironically, fulfilling the original flawed prophecy that the fish was too fragile. But Aang acknowledges the inspiration, validates the worth of the Tetra, ensures the specific outdoor infrastructure is built, and then deliberately schedules it behind other planned projects.
It's so methodical.
The wish list is a tool of intense discipline. It proves that Aang has evolved past reacting purely out of fear or pure impulse into someone who operates with deliberate, measured intent. The Tetra has been elevated from a scary, ignored unknown to a respected, scheduled goal.
I really, really appreciate that perspective. It reframes the entire ending of the journal entry for me.
Changes the tone, right?
Totally. It's not an anticlimax. It's a demonstration of ultimate self-control. Because, I know my own tendencies. If I saw something that completely blew my mind and proved a long-held bias wrong, my immediate instinct would be to dive into it that very second.
To prove it right.
Yeah, just to actively prove my new theory right to myself. I would want the immediate gratification of the pivot.
And that immediate gratification is exactly what ruins so many complex endeavors. Expertise is frequently defined much more by the restraint you show in the moment of discovery than by the action you take.
Man, that's profound.
Aang's ability to compartmentalize that intense burst of empirical realization and precisely file it away for the exact right moment guarantees that when the Tetra project finally does happen on that outdoor rack, it will be executed flawlessly.
That takes a brief, seemingly simple journal entry about a trip to a pet store and turns it into a masterclass on cognitive flexibility and operational discipline.
It really does.
Let's briefly recap the journey we have unpacked today. We began by looking at a seasoned expert, a breeder with many moons of meticulous experience who actively, intentionally avoided one of the most foundational, common staples in their entire field.
The Tetra.
Right. They completely ignored the Tetra, largely because they allowed the logistical realities of the supply chain and a resulting reputation for fragility to act as a psychological shield for their own ego.
Building the blind spot.
Then we examined the catalyst. We witnessed the exact moment that massive bias was completely shattered by empirical reality.
The mesmerizing behavior.
Yes. Aang observed Balloon Red Eye Tetras defying every expectation of fragility, suspending themselves perfectly in the water column and aggressively guarding their territory, spending immense biological energy to prove their vitality.
A beautiful moment of discovery.
And finally, we saw how true expertise processes a paradigm shift. Not with a reckless dopamine-fueled impulse buy, but by recognizing the need for specialized infrastructure, the outdoor fish rack, and applying the ironclad restraint of a carefully curated wish list.
It is a profoundly complete arc, moving from assumed hearsay to jarring empirical observation and finally landing on a deliberate scheduled action.
It really is a perfect little microcosm of learning. And as we bring this deep dive to a close, I want to direct this right back to you, the listener.
Yeah, think about your own life.
At the very beginning of our analysis, I asked you to visualize that one ubiquitous, inescapable element in your own career or your own hobby that you consistently ignore.
We all have one.
The truth is, we all have our own version of the Tetra. We all have that fundamental staple that we have completely written off. Maybe it's because of a lingering rumor or an intimidating reputation, or simply because we falsely believe our advanced experience means we no longer need to engage with the basics.
Right.
But maybe that staple is just sitting there waiting for you to gain enough true maturity and to build enough of your own internal infrastructure to finally feel capable of tackling it without the fear of failure.
And that leaves you with a critical question to consider as you move forward.
I'd love to hear it.
Think specifically about that fundamental thing you have been avoiding. What long-held foundational assumption in your own life might completely shatter if you simply stopped, suspended your ego for a moment, and actually observed the reality of something you have blindly walked past 100 times?
That is the perfect question to leave hanging in the air. Sometimes the most profound revelations aren't found at the cutting edge of our fields, but are hiding right there in the most common, everyday places we refuse to look. Thank you so much for joining us and exploring this with us today.